Are you ready? You make nice noise when you're talking to each other. It sounds friendly and community, which is what we're about. Thank you for joining us for the Faculty Lecture of the Year. This is a unique and important tradition. Very few community colleges take time off to hear from one of their own and think about new ideas as a community. Before we get started, please, out of respect for the speaker and your colleagues, turn off your cell phone, your smartphone, your tablet, and your Apple Watch. I'm sure you all have one of those by now. I'd like to introduce, before we start, Dr. Shannon. And our board members, Gary George and Paul Gomez. Because you are a smart and engaged group, I am sure you will want to join the discussion after Mark's talk. Discussion will take place at 11 o'clock, and it'll take place in the CAA building, also known as Center for Arts, in room 211. So if you're not familiar with it, if you walk straight out of this building here, you'll be looking right at it. It's a 3-story building. Also, after the discussion at 12:30, please join us for the Adjunct Adjunct Faculty Years of Service Reception in the multipurpose room, also called AD 151. For those of you who've been around a long time, that's where we used to register students. To be chosen as Faculty Lecturer of the Year is the highest honor the faculty gives. It also honors this college and all of you who are passionate about learning. Professor Mark Meyer of Anthropology is a researcher in human pathology, paleontology, interested in understanding the evolution of human behavior through archaeological fossil records. Mark comes from a family where education took a back seat to family business. Although he worked full-time driving a truck around New York City, he sneaked in behind his father's back to Queens College, where he earned a BA in anthropology. He, like many of our students, is the first in his family to go to college. When Mark was named valedictorian of Queens College, his parents were incredulous, thinking that the selection was erroneous, since he had showed only brief signs of intelligence at home. Mark credits his early academic success to falling in love with anthropology and avoiding sweets and exercising his brain by memorizing 80s music lyrics. He really wanted to be a rock star, but closest he got to rocks are fossils. Mark spent the next 6 years trying to lose his New York accent and learning to sit in a chair. You have students like that too. Earning his PhD in biological anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania. Mark's coursework in biological anthropology required him to take several courses at Penn's medical school, including gross anatomy. And upon graduating, he was recruited to serve as an instructor in the human anatomy at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine. After 3 years of teaching at Penn, the winds of change brought Mark to Chaffey College, where he has taught since 2007. Soon after coming to Chaffey, Mark's wife Summer gave birth to their twin sons, Hunter and Bailey, an event which coincided with his effort to never sleep. You all know about that too. Mark's anthropological experiences have taken him to such places as Kenya, South Africa, France, Soviet Georgia, Kazakhstan, and the exotic state of Tennessee. Today, Mark's family and teaching responsibilities preclude him from traveling for extended periods of time abroad. Nevertheless, at the advent of 3D scanning, technology has allowed Mark to be involved in research, as his colleagues can now send him scanned fossils and send the files for his analysis. He is currently collaborating with scholars in Hadar, Ethiopia, who have discovered some of the oldest fossils of human ancestry known to date from a species known as Ardipithecus ramdus, nicknamed Artie for those who are comfortable with that. Mark will sorry, the dry weather. Mark will not be traveling to Europe, to Ethiopia. Will not be traveling to Ethiopia to commune with Artie. Instead, he will be examining high-resolution scans of fossils while enjoying a Subway sandwich in his office in Zimmerman Hall. Mark has authored several publications on the biology and behavior of our ancient human ancestors, including Australopithecus and Africanus and Homo erectus, as well as the history of science. Mark's research in biological fieldwork has appeared in the pages of National Geographic, American Journal of Physical Anthropology, Nature Communications, and Scientific American. His 2014 fall sabbatical produced several new book chapters and peer review articles. Mark is our most prolific researcher and peer review article writer. He is an eminent scholar in the area of fossils of ancient humans, with the rare specialty in the study of the spine of our ancestors. In the future, which is going to be today, in the future you will be hearing about some of his more amazing new discoveries. Most of you have heard of Lucy, the famous fossil. He had a very startling discovery that is in the news, and I'll let him tell you about it, except he's probably not going to talk about that today. Mark Meyer, please come forward.
Well, hi guys. Thanks for coming today. I'd like to start by thanking and expressing my gratitude to Arden and Donna Walker for their invaluable help with this, and to members of the governing board, Dr. Shannon, and my colleague Michael Fong, the handsome Michael Fong, or as we call him, El Mustachio, for his guidance and inspiration. And maybe a surprising shout out today for Sandra Collins, if she's here, my next door neighbor in Zimmerman Hall, for changing the topic of my discussion today, which was going to be on boring bone anatomy. And now we're kind of dovetailing on the idea that Dr. Shannon set forth this year. So thank you, Collins. And thanks to my fellow faculty for giving me the opportunity to share some ideas with you guys today. And I want to begin by basically asking you guys a few questions. I need to know what race you are before we get started, because that's what people ask you all the time, right? What race are you? Why do we need to know this, right? Do I need to know what race you are to have you sit here and listen to me? Yes, because that's what we're conditioned to do, right? All the time people ask you, what are you? And you immediately come up with an answer. This is what I am. It's usually a type of person, right? You don't usually say, I'm Mark or El Mustachio. You say, I'm a type of person. You have to check a box. Every 10 years you get a census, right? You check it off. You're filling out a form for a loan or an application. Where's my spot? Here I am. And you check it. What features do you actually use to decide what you are? Who taught you what race you are? Did your parents say, okay, look, this makes you your race? Or did you just sort of pick it up through osmosis? How many races are there anyway? This is an easy question, right? Look at the census. Count them. Boop, 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 boop. Or look around the room. Just count them. How many races are in this room? It's an easy question. Just look at different people. We know how to tell each other apart. We know what race we are. We know what race they are, don't we? Or do we? How many races are there? One hand? Do you count them on two hands? Or do you need all your fingers and all your toes? Do you need all of our fingers and all our toes to count the types of people there are in the world? Well, I want to start off by just goofing around with a few ideas of Western racial notions. Where did the idea of race come from in the West? Aristotle, that many of you know about, thought that there were three different types of people. In his little closed-minded world, the myopic world of the circum-Mediterranean Greek world, he saw three different types of people. The folks he saw around him, you recognize today, but he didn't look at them based on their morphology. He just looked at where folks lived. Where you live, that's the race you take on. This idea was later woven into the tapestry of Scripture, a couple of thousand years later or so, when Noah's sons, who all looked a little bit different from one another, would basically start the races that we recognize today. So again, there are 3 races in the world. Linnaeus, many of you know from 9th grade biology, the Swedish botanist, zoologist, anatomist, he decided that there were actually 4 races. The 4 races were encoded in his book, Systema Naturae, and many folks still subscribe to the notion that there are just 4 essential types of people. You recognize these types, right? Native Americans, Hispanics, we don't put on this list. Linnaeus didn't notice them. But basically, the type of person that you are, according to Linnaeus, was based on your biology, how you looked. Most notably, the most overt thing about you, your skin color. Black skin, red skin, where are you? White skin and bright yellow. These are the colors we come in, right? You look in a crayon box, yeah, red people. Is this true? Is this correct? 4 people. But what he did was further. He wrote pages and pages about not only someone's appearance, but how that appearance, their skin color, for example, made them act a certain way, gave them certain abilities, or denied them other abilities. For example, the black skin of Africans, by default, made them lazy. Immutable, not changeable. If you're black, you have to act this way. He conflated culture with biology. Next, the red people, they're stubborn. Can't change it. Yellow people, the Asians, avaricious, greedy, by design. This is what God did. And he made white people, his people, smart, inventive, by design, superior to all others. Where did he get this idea that there were 4 kinds of people? You know where he got it? He pulled it out of a very dark, round place on his backside. He made this up. He just invented this idea. Are there really 4 types of people? Along came a German by the name of Blumenbach who said, nope, 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 you got it right. And instead of pulling it out of that similar place, he looked at skulls. He had hundreds of skulls at his disposal, and he measured the geometry. He took a look at the shape of the face and the different types of people, and he thought there was one more type that Linnaeus had left out. He saw 5 different types of people around the world, and he added Malaysians to the mix. 5 different types of essential people. This basically was celebrated by scientists. They started calling people by these 5 types. By the way, Europeans, he called Caucasians. Maybe you've heard that. Maybe you've seen it on a checklist somewhere. The word Caucasian comes from the Caucasus, the mountains in Asia, by the way, not in Europe. But in Blumenbach's skull collection, he found the most beautiful, the most pleasing to the eye skull of all belonged to a Caucasian. And he just assumed that this one would fit better in the European mix, and something of a misnomer. Caucasians are actually not from the Caucasus. The U.S. didn't have as many types of people because the types of people that we typically ask about or kind of try and classify in America are the people we see. We don't worry about Eskimos. We don't worry about Australians. In America, the first census only had 2 categories based on what people were exposed to. The number kept changing, and the number kept changing. After a while, the number started to swell, and it got up to 331 races by the last census. There were 331 combinations at this point. You could check more than one in 2010, or you could check none. I don't belong to any of these races. How is this biologically accurate if you're none of the above? And by the way, this is 6% of us. 6% of us don't fit in. We can't find a race. Now, if you look around the world, you see a zebra, that's a zebra. You can't confuse it with a horse, that's a horse. But we can't figure out, 6% of us, what we are. It's brilliant. What about Jews? What did Jews check off? My grandfather, William Meyer, I looked up his census, he had to check off Jew, not white, because Jews were not considered to be white. Italians, Irish, at any given point, these people were not allowed to be white either. This was a pretty exclusive club. But Hindus were invited to the party. They were white. This makes absolutely no sense in terms of biology, but it makes perfect sense in terms of colonial policy, right? We can't seem to make up our mind what Mexicans are. For my Mexicans in the house, in the 1920s, you were white, and then you weren't. In the 1930s, basically, there was the Depression, and Mexicans were trying to move to America to get a job, and they were no longer welcome. Except during the war, to aid the war effort, they were white again. This makes absolutely no sense in terms of biology, but makes sense in terms of the labor market, political and economic factors, not biological factors. Being black is not so simple in America. Back in the day, all you needed was one grandparent and you were black. But later on, in other states, you just needed one great-grandparent, one tiny drop of black blood. It's like nuclear, and you're black. In the 1930s, you could be black in one state and get on your big wheel and cross state lines, and you would legally be a different race. How is that real? How is race real? How many are there? Why does it keep changing? Let's think about it. When you thought about what race you were, did you use features like these? If you ask 9 out of 10 people, what makes somebody their race? They'll go straight to the top, won't they? They'll say, skin color. I'm black, I'm black. My skin is white, I'm white. Or maybe you looked at something else. Maybe you looked at your ethnicity, the way you behave, the food you eat, or where you come from. I want to work through each of these one at a time. Some of them we'll dwell on, others we'll blast through. But I want to just kind of think about this. The top one here, this is the big one. Skin color. Why do we come in different colors anyway? What's the point? To understand why we come in different skin colors, you have to understand the function of your skin. What is it there for? Yeah, it senses heat and pressure. It's ticklish, all that good stuff. But it's also there to protect you. This little guy's tushy is a different color from that guy's tushy because it had to be back in the day when their ancestors were struggling to survive. They come from different parts of the world, and different parts of the world take on different levels of radiation. Back in the old days, you weren't sitting indoors, air-conditioned. You were out in the sun, and you were trying to make it. Radiation is radiation, whether it comes from the Fukushima nuclear power plant or from the sun. It's hardcore. But you actually need a little bit of radiation. It's actually kind of good for you. When radiation hits your skin, a whole bunch of chemical changes occur, and through this whole cascade, you get a vitamin. Vitamin D. It's essential. You must have vitamin D. Without it, you don't develop. Your immune system doesn't work. Your brain chemistry doesn't work. Your bones don't grow the right way. Without vitamin D, you die. Throughout history, people got their vitamin D from the sun. It was not in milk. It was not in bread. Those things were added much, much later, just yesterday. Throughout history, people struggled to get enough vitamin D. They got it because they ran around naked outside. But on the equator, radiation levels are particularly deadly. And if your skin is the wrong color, you might be in trouble. It took me 4 hours, by the way. But if your skin is dark, you don't get skin cancer, you don't die, because you have something called pigment. The pigment in question, melanin. Melanin, if you have it in your skin, and we all do, some people have more of it, is sunscreen, built into your skin. It's automatic sunblock. You don't die of cancer because this pigment filters out most of the harmful effects of radiation. Protects you from skin cancer. But there's enough on the equator, there's enough radiation that even with this sunscreen you can produce enough vitamin D.
Oh yeah, that's nice.
But here's the problem. If you move away from the equator and your skin is dark, it's not so good. That pigment, which was really useful on the equator, turns out to be a liability far from the equator, and people cannot produce enough vitamin D. And they suffer from the effects of a disease called rickets. In children, it's called rickets. In adults, it's called osteomalacia. It's deadly. No vitamin D.
No, 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 no!
Another 3 hours. Okay. But if your skin is light, you actually have a selective advantage. Light skin does better far from the equator because there's no sunscreen. And even in tiny areas where there's only a tiny bit of radiation, you can still produce enough vitamin D. It's the last sound effect, I promise. But less pigment actually works better far from the equator, but is a disaster on the equator. Having more pigment on the equator is required, however. So the fact that we come in different skin colors is a function of our skin to protect us from intensive radiation levels on the equator, but you must have light skin far from the equator. Those people in between, there's a balancing act. If there's not that much radiation, you don't have to be as dark, but you have to be a little bit lighter so that you can still produce enough vitamin D. So it's a compromise between vitamin D synthesis and protecting against skin cancer. That dark skin, it's not associated with any race, by the way. It's just associated with high levels of radiation. This map shows you the dark areas where radiation levels are highest on this planet. And in those lighter shaded areas, that's a region of the world where radiation levels are a little bit lower. This guy living in Australia, northern Australia, must have dark skin. His ancestors had it. It's a good thing. In areas of the world where there is that same amount of radiation, predictably, you find indigenous people have been there for generations, that have dark skin. Go a little bit further north, dark skin is not good here. You would die of rickets, so over many generations, light skin predominated. If you go to these intermediate regions, North Africa, Africans don't all come in the same color. Here you can see it's an intermediate skin tone, exactly what you would expect from an intermediate region of the world in terms of radiation. Moving to Europe, where white people live, right? The Mediterranean is an area of intermediate radiation levels. And guess what skin color they have? A white guy who's kind of tannish, darkish. Let's move up a little bit more to another European here in Portugal. Less radiation, less melanin. Still not white. We call these people white people. We're conditioned to say that. But he's like a tan guy. Tan guy. By the way, Michael Fong, this slide's for you. Let's move over just a little bit. We make a right turn here, and we move to a whole other continent. We should find a whole different type of person, right? With an Asian continent here, Asia Minor, in this case Turkey. We should find yellow skin, but we find the exact same color that we found in Portugal. We find intermediate skin tones just where we would expect them. We don't find white. We don't find black. We find lots of intermediate people. Let's move up to Northern Asia. Very little radiation, very little melanin. Low pigment, so you can make enough vitamin D. Let's go to Central Asia. Asians, they all come in the same color, right? Linnea said it, they're yellow. This is an area of intermediate radiation, and in Nepal, you find intermediate skin tones. This game is getting pretty easy, right? Let's go to Southern Asia here. What skin tone would you expect here? Exactly. Skin color has nothing to do with your race. You find people with brownish skin tone among Asians, among Hispanics, among Southern Europeans, among Africans. It's a human trait. It's found wherever people need it. I wish I had enough money to go to Fiji. Have any of you guys ever been there? Okay, so let's play this game. What color would you expect to find on the island of Fiji? Does this make sense? Dark skin where it's needed. White guy, India, according to the census, right? Maybe not. Even within the continent of Africa, you find different skin tones. Supposedly the same race, Africans, they're all black, right? Well, which one of these would you guess lives closest to the equator and which one doesn't? On the left, you have a woman from Ghana, pretty close to the equator. This woman on the right is a Kung, from the Kung tribe. There's actually a sound before you say Kung. I can't really do it. But the Kung people live at the tip of South Africa and Botswana, and they have this sort of lighter skin tone. Anthropologists were obsessed with this thing about skin color, and they searched the world to try and divide us into different races based on these 36 different skin tones. This is back in the 1900s. Early 1900s, they were the most racist people on earth, the anthropologists. And they thought that they could really separate us based on these different tones. And they were looking to see if they could figure out what race this person would be. But quickly they realized this is a really dumb question. A better question would be, what race could this person be? What race could they be? Could they be black, like Riri? Hispanic? Hips don't lie. Could they be Asian? Same skin color. And if you go to New Zealand among the Maori, the skin tone there is pretty much the same as everybody else who lives that distance from the equator. But this one's easy. Everybody knows what skin color this is, right? Sri Lankan. Must have dark skin. And people of Sri Lanka and anybody else who lives right on the equator essentially needs the same skin color. And that, in fact, is the original skin tone for all of us. No matter what race you check off, we are all African. The fossil record tells us this. The genetics tell us this. The archaeological record tells us whatever you think you are, you've got a deep root in Africa. It's the cradle of humanity. And this is where we come from. Over thousands of years and many generations, we would grow up there. And then we would leave home. We would leave the ancestral continent, and guess what we would bring with us? Our skin. And the default color, the original skin color for us, is brown. In some places this was good, and we would keep that skin tone. But in some places, some of the kids wouldn't do as well, and only the lightest ones would do better. You watch The Cosby Show, kids come in all kinds of different colors. And if you're lighter up north, there you go. You're going to survive and make babies. And over many generations, we have light-skinned folks who turn up. In those intermediate regions, exactly what we talked about, intermediate skin tone. This is not based on geography. This is based on radiation. It's not based on race. Your skin color is based on radiation levels and what your ancestors had to contend with, because they weren't buffered from the world like we are right now. Nobody's sweating. Nobody's dying in this room. But back in the day, if you were the wrong color, you would die. Up north, less radiation appears. It's an adaptation to low radiation levels. Light skin is really, really good at making vitamin D. This is a lady with essentially no pigment, no melanin. You can see a sandwich pass through her body. That's how light skinned she is. She's extremely light, which means she goes from her car to the mall. The sun hits her. Even up in Iceland, there's enough radiation there because she's not bouncing anything back to produce vitamin D. We're conditioned. We learn. I don't know where we learn it, but we're told there are white people and black people, right? And we split them up into different types. They're not the same people. They're different kinds of people. This is my favorite slide of the day. An anthropologist in the 80s and his team went to the equator. From the Netherlands to the equator. People up north in the Netherlands have pretty light skin, right? The Chaffey, very dark skin. Why? They're on the equator. They don't use sunblock. They don't wear clothes. Everything's swinging around. They're out there in the sun. And if they didn't have built-in sunscreen, they would be dead. So of course they're dark. And as this guy, instead of flying back home and taking a plane, like everybody does, and just goes to the extreme parts of the world, instead of going back home, he measured skin tones. I'm going to disappear here for a minute. But you can see the Chaffey here have the darkest skin on this x-axis. And as he moved, he went 100 miles at a time, sometimes 200 miles at a time, and he met the next tribe. And he took a light sensor and zapped them in the armpit, where they were less likely to tan or change their default color, and he would measure the amount of skin color that would reflect back, or light that would reflect back. And as he moved up from the equator, by bus and by foot and by cab, he got all the way back home to where the white people were. What he realized is finding the difference between white people and black people is easy if you just look at the ends. If you look at the ends of this continuum. But as he walked back home, he didn't see a division between white people and black people. He saw black turn to brown, turn to light brown, turn to tan, turn to lightish, and turn to something not white. But we essentialize people, call them white and black, don't we? But I'm going to ask you here, guys. Here's your test. Where do the white people begin? Is there a place where we can divide the world into white people and black people? You do this every day, don't you? Oh, that white cop, that black guy. We divide the world. It's autopilot. We don't think about it. It's because we don't see people in the middle, do we? We don't see those folks. We just focus on the ends of the continuum. We ignore the mass of humanity that's outside of America. And the idea that there are white people and black people is an artifact of slavery. In this country, people from way up north didn't go by foot to Africa. They sailed around, and they grabbed folks, and they came face to face in the New World. They look each other in the eye, and they say, oh, look, we're different kinds of people. By the way, if you're looking carefully, it's the same guy, right? And instead of being people, they call each other types of people. No names, no individual identity. You're a kind of person. That's what happens when you call somebody by a racial name. They stop being a person, and they become a type. You can't draw lines between us. Linnaeus did it. The fact that we still do this today makes absolutely no sense. Certainly not based on skin color. What can you really tell about somebody from the color of their skin? You've probably seen these guys on the internet, right? Which one's smarter? How do you know which one's smart? Which one's a better dancer? It's kind of a dumb question, right? They're twins. Which brother here is better at math? Can you tell by looking at their pigmentation? Which one's a better basketball player, a better at doing something? Can you tell anything about an individual's aptitudes or abilities from their pigment? It's a dumb question. Look at these puppies. You tell me which one's the smartest. Which one's the fastest? Which puppy is superior? It's so stupid. Why do we do this? Your skin color is given to you by mommy and daddy. Dad gives you 6 genes, mom gives you 6. They mix together and blend in the baby in a sense, and there's the baby. You could be a different color from mom and dad, but the genes that you get from mom and dad for pigment, they have one job. Pigment. Period. They don't make bone, they don't make muscle, they don't make brain cells. They give you some pigment. So what can you tell about somebody from the color of their skin? 2 things. The color of their skin. And then functionally, where their ancestors might have lived. Did they live close to the equator, far from the equator, or very far from the equator? That's all skin color tells you. Does it determine your race? Let's cross that one off. That one we spent a lot of time on. But you see, these other features, you know what race someone is by looking at their nose, right? Here's a black nose, of course. Wide nose. Everybody who's got dark skin has a wide nose, right? This is what a skull looks like in a typical African. That wide, broad nose is perfect for hot, humid environments. If you look inside someone's nose, there's a lot going on there, right? There's broad nose on the right, a narrow nose on the left. There are these turbinates inside your nose. These are called nasal concha, and in life they're covered with mucosa. and they have a job. Their job is to deal with the air that's passing through your nose on its way to your lungs, because your lungs must have humidified air. If your lungs get dried out, you're dead. Your lungs become a vector of infection. So your nose is the first stop for air to be processed. If you live in a hot, humid environment, the last thing you want to do is add any more heat or humidity. But if you live in the desert, you want to add some humidity to that inspired air. As it passes and swirls around those nasal turbinates, it picks up just enough humidity, just enough so that your lungs are comfortable and they don't become a vector of infection. This nose on the right, you're going to find anywhere where there is hot, humid weather. The nose on the left is basically a narrow hallway. As inspired air passes through it, it swirls and dances and picks up a little bit of humidity. And this nose on the right, perfect for where it's hot and humid, has nothing to do with your race, because you'll find people of the same race with the same skin color that have a radically different nose shape. It's not something to do with your race. It has to do with the environment that your ancestors had to deal with. The way you look is the product of your ancestral environment. Nose shape, you'll find that wide nose anywhere it's hot and humid. You'll find that narrow nose in any race. Doesn't matter. It just really has to do with where your parents or ancestors come from. Can we cross this one off? Hair. This is easy. Everybody knows who's got that straight hair, the blonde hair, right? You can figure out someone's race by looking at their hair. Hey, that person's got an afro. I know their race. Hair type. How many hours have we wasted in our lives watching this? It's fascinating though, right? The afro, okay, so notwithstanding, the afro, that curly, kinky hair, always comes with brown skin though. So that's a racial trait, right? Only if you stay in America and keep your eyes shut. In our little myopic world in America, we don't run into people with dark skin and straight hair like you see in Australia, places like Micronesia. In Australia, you might find red hair, wavy hair, dark skin. Your skin color and your hair types are independent. You'll even find dark skin and blonde hair, places like the Solomon Islands. And they didn't get this from a bottle. They didn't dye it. They didn't get it from hooking up with pirates. They got it because they got it. It's part of their genetic repertoire. The type of hair you have, like this little girl from the Solomon Islands, that's the type of hair you have. It has nothing to do with your race. And it's independent of your skin color. Take a look at those eyes, by the way. Those epicanthic folds, those folded eyelids that you find that we typically say is an Asian trait, right? In the Solomon Islands, you find that epicanthic fold with curly blonde hair. That epicanthic fold, by the way, is not an Asian trait. It was invented in Africa. The Kung people, this is a woman from the Kung tribe. These folks have the world's oldest physiology. When we look at their DNA, it's the oldest on the planet. When we look at their language, it's the oldest on the planet. Sounds like a typewriter. They're clicking. They invented the epicanthic fold. That epicanthic fold is an African trait, or a human trait, I should say, and it's still in Africa. Many, many populations still have that epicanthic fold, and as we left Africa, guess what we took with us? Our epicanthic fold. And if you look in Asia, you'll see it's still there. And as Asians migrate and make their way into the New World 15,000 years ago, they took with them the epicanthic fold. That folded eyelid made its way into South America too, and the Yanomamo people have the original eye shape for humans. This is not an Asian trait, people. This is a human trait. Can we cross these off? Blood. Black blood, right? The blood type you have, that must make you your race. After all, one drop of black blood, you're black. This is where people have type O blood. In the blue, density is highest. The frequency is in red, a little bit lower. But if you look at people with type O blood, this, by the way, is the first blood type for humans, the original blood type. You find it here in North and South America, but you're also going to find it in Asia. And you're going to find it here, and you're going to find it here, and it does not correspond to our notions of racial typology, does it? If you have type A blood, congratulations, you're from Europe. or Australia, or you're an Eskimo, does not correspond to your race either. Oh, by the way, type A blood, you have a little bit of immunity to smallpox. That's why we think this thing evolved. Type B blood has nothing to do with your race. You might be Asian, you might be African. This gives you a slight advantage to diseases like yellow fever. Has nothing to do with your race, has to do with the environment your ancestors struggled with. So I suggest we cannot use blood type to categorize us. It is a characteristic that we all inherited from our ancestors who once struggled. Let's cross this one off and move on to the one that is probably going to be the one that gives us our answer. We would think that genetics would give us the most cogent answer. Our DNA will tell us what race we are. Turns out, thanks to the Human Genome Project, it doesn't. In fact, there are more differences within any given race. People are different within one race more than they are between races. And if you look and count all of our letters in our alphabet of our genome, A, T, C, G, look at those letters and compare them. Everybody in this room is almost identical. You and the person sitting next to you are less than 1/10 of 1% different. And you and that person in the Congo, less than 1/10 of 1% different. That person in the Congo and the person in Iceland, you get it. We basically plagiarized our genetic code from each other. There's almost no difference between them. And I like to think of this as a book. If you're looking at your genome and you print out your booklet of the A, T, C, G, it's 3.1 billion letters in your book. And these books might have different covers, and they appear to be radically different on the outside. But if you open up the book of your genome and compare it to someone else's, left is yours, on the right there's somebody else. Page 1, not a single difference. Page 2, no difference. Page 12, no difference. Page 67, no difference. Page 106, page 317, I found a difference. The books are really different on the outside. And look, there's an A here and a G there. Totally different kinds of people. I don't know about you, but if I got a paper from a student where 300 pages were exactly the same, it's the same paper. But we don't focus on what's going on inside, do we? We focus on the cover of the book. We're obsessed with how things look on the outside, and we ignore the overwhelming similarities between us. These two cousins found that out when they sent their DNA out. 23andMe, the Genome Project, $99. Doom. They found each other and they realized they are identical twins, essentially, on the inside. These cousins might look a little bit different as she wipes the lipstick off his face. But they have a lot more in common than you might think. Genetics actually fails to discriminate between different kinds of people. So we're going to leave the biology alone, and we're going to go over here to things like how you are, how you act, where you come from. Let's start off with geography. This is the one Aristotle said, hey, we're Asian, European, and African. And this is, of course, what you learn in 3rd grade. You learn the map. And there are divisions between different parts of the world, aren't there? Look, there's a line between Asia and Europe. Those people must be totally different from each other because we drew a line there. That line does not exist in nature, does it? This is Asia. Is this what you typically think of for an Asian? Well, that's not what the census thinks of this guy. The census says he's white. Geography does not map onto your race in America. Take a look at this circle. I bet you can't tell any of these people apart from each other. Yet you're dealing with 3 separate continents. Everybody in this circle pretty much looks the same. Here's a guy on one side of the line. Here's a guy on the other side of the line. You got an Armenian, you got a Romanian. They're on totally different continents, and they should be different races. Here's the Armenian, looking like a George Clooney guy there. And a Romanian. Can you tell these guys apart? But there's a line drawn. Somebody drew a line that says, you live in different parts of the world. You're different kinds of people. But everybody in this circle looks like their neighbors. You walk from place to place here. You can't tell these folks apart. And then if you look a little bit further this way, people look like their neighbors. Keep going, and you take your time and walk. People just look pretty much the same. But if you compare people from far away, look at the extremes, yeah, you're going to find some differences. If you ignore what's going on in between, you get sort of lulled into this sense that there are different kinds of people, but we blend. There are no divisions between us in nature. We invented those divisions. We gave them names. So is race where you're born then? Maybe it's not from, where your ancestors, is it where you're born? If you're born in London, you're white, right? Okay, maybe not, but where your parents are born, yeah? Okay, so it's not where your parents are born, it must be your grandparents. Here's my grandparents. Russia, a little Middle Eastern, a little Southern Europe thing there. What race am I based on geography? I'll tell you what race I think I am. Mutt. I'm a mutt, and you're a mutt. But if you actually go back in time, go back 100,000 years, you could check off African. I've done that. When I was in grad school, I applied for a job at Howard University. It's an HBC. Historically black college. I checked off for this application, black. And when I showed up for the job interview, I got shortlisted there. By the way, you notice I didn't get the job. I got shortlisted there, and I shook hands. There's three of us showed up for the job interview. I'm shaking the dean's hand. He's like, huh? I said to him, this is what I'm here to talk about. I'm African. 60,000 years ago, but I'm African. I don't think geography helps you figure out what someone's race is, right, guys? Let's think about it this way. If you think you're Mexican, but you weren't born in Mexico, you're not Mexican. Geography doesn't work, right? Let's look at language. If you speak English, you're British, you're a white guy, yeah? Or not. You speak Spanish, you're Hispanic. But look how many different flavors people come in within Hispanics. Does speaking Spanish, yo no sé, I don't know, does speaking Spanish make you Hispanic? Dumb question. Ebonics, if you drop a little Ebonics, the historically black dialect, linguists are studying this. It's considered a vernacular black English now. You speak Ebonics, does that make you black? Let's cross this off. We're left with, I'm going to conflate these two. I'm going to throw them together because ethnicity is a black box. There's no definition for ethnicity that I like. It's just stuff. The way you behave, the way you act. How about Jews? We always say Jews are an ethnicity. My grandfather had to check this off. When he took the census, 1930, he checked off Jew, not white, not Europe, whatever. Are Jews a race? We hear this all the time. They're a type of person. Jews are a race only if all Muslims are a race. Because if you're going to base someone's race membership on their ideology, you're going to have to accept a lot of differences. Things like different language, biology, totally different cultures between people of the same religion. I submit that these people would not be considered the same race in America despite shared ideology. Is it how you dress? Put on a hoodie, you're one race? Thing is, the way you dress is shared by people all over the world. Globalization has basically homogenized the world, hasn't it? It's not how you dress. Africans decorate their bodies a certain way. But there's variation. There is no uniform. So what makes you your race? Is it how you grow up, what you eat? If you eat tacos, are you Mexican? What makes you your race? Is it what you learn? The world you grow up in? How can you measure that? Can you see that on the outside? I don't think you can. I'm going to cross all these off. Biology, can you figure out what race someone is in a cohesive way? We fail. This is my thesis today, guys. What makes you your race? What race are you? Your race is how other people think about you. You can't measure this looking at biology or geography. It's just what other people think you are. That's your race. And your race is really not even up to you. Has anybody in here ever been called the wrong race? Anybody ever confused the kind of person you are? It happens all the time. What race are you? This guy probably gets it every day of his life. What race are you? Everybody just thinks they know who he is, what he is. He's not what you think he is. What type of guy is this? Black male, spotted, running. No, I'm not black, he will argue. But you don't get to decide. We decide for you. It doesn't matter what you think you are. Somebody's going to assign a race to you. And you have to deal with it. I lived through this at the San Diego Zoo. Summer remembers. We're at the San Diego Zoo. I'm playing with my kids at the petting zoo. There's a little playground. They're climbing on stuff, and they're jumping on goats, and they're getting in all kinds of trouble. They are my children, after all. And there's some dude wearing boots and a cowboy hat with a southern accent, and he's like, dude, can I take a picture over here? Well, I'm trying to take a photo. Can you get your kids out of the picture? You don't want to know what I said to the guy. And he looks at me after a second, and he says, he decided that I wasn't American or didn't belong. Didn't matter what I thought I was. Go back to your country. I'm like thinking, Brooklyn? Where do you want me to go? Your race is not up to you. Your race is what other people think you are. And the names that we give each other, hey, that guy's black, that guy's Asian, that's a white guy. These are not neutral terms, by the way. These things are imbued with rank. One is better than the next. These were arranged in this order by Linnaeus, in accordance with what was called the Great Chain of Being back in the 1700s. Linnaeus came up with this. He put him and his kind at the top, right? Right underneath God, the most perfect of all, angels, slightly less perfect, but Europeans being closest to perfection of all types of people. The Great Chain of Being ranked different kinds of people. This was part of culture in the West. And Africans, one rung above the beasts. By design, divine order, God intended Europeans to basically hold dominion over all others. They were better, more perfect. So when you call somebody by one of these names, I would argue you're kind of ranking them. The Great Chain of Being, this is how we thought about our world in the past. It's actually how we think of each other today. This thing doesn't make any sense. But each type was ranked in accordance with this Great Chain of Being. And when you call somebody black, you're basically using an old slave typology, an old corrupt, defunct sort of way of thinking about the world. Let's put this into play. Barack Hussein Obama, as Fox News likes to call him. Barack Obama still thinks of himself in these terms, in terms of old slave typology. Because according to the Great Chain of Being, if you have mixed ancestry, Kenyan and European, you're not a mix. In America, there was a rule, this was a code based on the drop of black blood. If you had one drop of black blood, you're black. It's an old slave rule. And this is still how we think of ourselves and how we think of other people. Because if you're European and African, you move down. You're only African. The rule of hypodescent means you can't choose the highest ranking race. You must only move down. You're not white. Obama can't claim to be white. Even though he's just got as much as right to say he's white, 50%, he checked off black in his census. If you're black in this country, even one drop, you can't climb up to freedom. You can't be free. You can't be equal. You can't be as good as those who consider themselves to be ranked higher. Why Obama says he's black? It's because we've all been conditioned to think in these terms, the Great Chain of Being. He listens to the Beatles. He can act as white as anybody else, but you know what? We're going to keep him down at the lowest rung because that's how America works. What race is Tiger Woods? El Tigre. From what I understand, he used to be a golfer. Let's take a look at his background. Talk about a mutt. he's Thai and all this other stuff, and he's got a little bit of African American. And then what we do in America is we have to figure out what race he is, and we can't say he's all of these. We must just choose the lowest possible rank. So we go down to the lowest possible choice. This is the great chain of being in America. And if you're mixed in any combination, whether it's Asian or Hispanic, if you have any kind of mixture, you must automatically default to the lowest possible choice in America. Your rank goes down. Nobody can climb up. Now, these are my two children a couple of years ago. Many of you have seen them running around on campus. My kids, Tupac and Biggie. Hunter and Bailey, actually. And you can see how they look based on their biology. You know, you take them to Kaiser, and the doctor asks you what, you know, they actually assign a race to you, right? They just check off the box. Last time I went to Kaiser, and I looked, my kids were black. And my kids can read now, and they're like, what does that mean, Daddy? Black? We're black? I was like, well, that's what the hospital says, but, you know, you're Hunter. But in America, he's not Hunter. He's black. There's a little picture of Bailey, and he's light and bright, but that's Mama on the left holding him, and Mama is made of chocolate. Dark chocolate, and she's African American. So if you have one drop of black blood, little Bailey here, regardless of how he looks, he's black. The rule of hypodescent moves you down to the lowest possible choice. So in America, your race has almost nothing to do with the way you look. It has to do with if you had one lower ranked parent or grandparent. And I'm just going to walk over to Holly Berry here, the first actress, black actress to win an Academy Award for Best Actress. I'm darker than Holly Berry. She's black. Another example here, there's a woman who's Mexican and Jewish. Jews, we don't know where to put them. I'll just throw them up here with European for the time being. Many folks might think she's mixed that way. Well, in America, she's Mexican. You choose the lowest possible choice. She says no. She protests, I'm not Mexican. I'm Erica. Problem is, we won't let her be Erica. We squeeze everybody into a box, the lowest possible choice we can find, and that's your race. Obama, we can never let him get away with being white. We push him down, you're black. We want to take back our country. You don't belong up here. I would say that Obama maybe isn't as black as you think. So your race in America is really not about what you want it to be. You might contend you're this race, that race. You might check off a box, but it's not about you. It's about what other people think about you. It's about how you're seen by others, how you're treated by others, what burdens you share. But bottom line here, when you look at people and you call them by a racial type, you're ranking them. You assume that they are somewhere in this racial hierarchy in America, and you put them in their place. In Asia, by the way, China, they don't have the same rank order. There, Europeans are subordinate. They're not as good as Chinese people. They're considered monkeys. At least they were in antiquity. And so if you are mixed ancestry in Asia or in China, you move down the racial hierarchy. That European blood contaminates you and you move down. In America, we flip it this way. Linnaeus decided this is how it is. It's in a book. It's been there for a couple hundred years. People buy into it. But I would suggest that this is what caused all of these problems in the days of conquest. As Europeans spread around the world with their guns and germs and steel, they basically, this idea of the great chain of being justified the agenda, the pernicious agenda of Asian colonialism. We'll take their land. They're not as good as us. This is by divine order. Genocide in America. 90% of Native Americans were killed. Governments paid, California paid $5 a head for every dead Native American. This state paid people to kill Native Americans because they weren't people. Look, they're subhuman. They're like coyotes. Get them off the land. This is what God intended. This justified genocide in this country. And you know what it did for Africans? It didn't help them very much either. This basically said to Europeans, we're better by divine order. We are meant to hold dominion over them, and they should be domesticated. And the way they were treated was justified by the great chain of being. This was acceptable because this is what God intended in the mind of the Western cultures. Just another quick story to instantiate this a little bit. This is a guy named Atabenga, and maybe you've heard of Atabenga. Around the turn of the 19th century, 1900. This guy in this picture, by the way, is 21 years old. The Mbuti pygmies really just don't look like adults, even though they are adults. And he had a wife and a child. And he went out hunting one day, and he came back to find his village was burned, and the Belgians had killed his entire family, everybody he knew. He had nowhere to go. He was taken in. He was brought to America, and he was put on display in the World's Fair. After the World's Fair closed, he couldn't afford to go anywhere. He was put into the Bronx Zoo, into the monkey house, behind bars, next to orangutans, next to chimps, Mbuti pygmy. Not a human, something inferior to humans. And as Europeans would walk past that cage, you know what they would think? We're superior. This reinforced the idea that they are superior. After his death, by the way, he was so despondent, he knew he was never getting home. As a policeman walked past him one day, he grabbed the gun and shot himself in the heart. Killed himself. He escaped. After his death, they made a death mask and put it on display in the Museum of Natural History in New York. But it didn't say Atabenga. It didn't have his name on it. It just said pygmy. Not a person, a trophy, a thing. There's the rhino, there's the buffalo, there's the pygmy. Not a person, a type of person. Because he's the other, not us. He belongs to a different group of people. He didn't have an individual identity. And when we think of some other type of person, we kind of remove their identity, don't we? When we think of people based on their race, they just become a type, and then they become all the same. You don't need to investigate. You don't need to know who they are. You just essentialize them, and you know exactly what you're getting. That's the problem with race typologies. Kierkegaard said this. He said, you know, once you give me a label, and he wasn't talking about race here, but I'm going to borrow this. Once you label me as a type, you erase me. You negate me. I disappear. I become a type of person. I lose myself. And I would argue that you are a racist if you call somebody by these old racist slave names. If you call somebody black, basically what you're arguing is that they're the worst. And you're reifying the notion that we can rank these people because we've become so accustomed to saying black and Asian and white guy. I just say that that's reifying, making it real that these are categories that exist in nature and that you could actually rank them because they're not neutral. It's race number 1, 2, 3, and worst. This notion that there are different types of people, we sort of accept this. We're born into a family where it's us and those neighbors, they're noisy. It's us, Chaffey College and Mount Sac, they suck. It's a natural thing to divide the world into groups. If it's your religion, we're better than them. Anytime you divide the world into us and them, and we're really good at this, we're always better than them, aren't we? Our group is always superior. And these differences appear to be real on the surface, right? You got people dressing differently, with different languages, they act different, and we make fun of them. And when we do, we rally together. Being racist is a solidifying thing. It galvanizes people. Yeah, our group is the best. Problem is, these divisions are arbitrary. They're invented. They're fictitious. Take a look around the world, and people divide themselves in ways that you do not see. I see no difference between these people, but you know about the genocide that was perpetrated. They think they're totally different kinds of people. So do Jews and Arabs. And if you look at the archaeological record, guess what? 5,000 years ago, they're living happily in huts. Their DNA, almost identical. Closer than anybody else. Sworn enemies. But they're the same people. We don't distinguish in this country between Persians and Arabs, but they do. They see a difference. They draw a line. This is purely cultural stuff, guys. These guys are brothers. Only they're not, because they come from their different tribe names. They're taught that the other one is inferior. And they're taught that my group is superior. And the Rwandan genocide really instantiates how bad it is when you just decide someone is not us, because it gives us permission to do bad things to others. See, the thing about the world is there is no us and them. There's no place you can divide us. It's just us. You and me. You know, I asked you at the beginning how many races there were. I'm getting a little emotional here. Hold on. How many races there are, right? Could you count them on both hands, both feet? The thing is, there's just one race. I'm not done yet. Wait. If you take a look at these hands, they look pretty similar, don't they? But we're not taught to look at the similarities. We're taught to notice what's different. There's nothing different about those hands. Yeah, the book's a little different on the cover. There's no place in nature where you can divide us into discrete different races, though. I suggest we need to unlearn racial categories. Here's where I want to look at my notes to make sure I get this right. See, we teach our kids, we condition them to think of themselves as different from other people. But I think we should start teaching them how similar we are. I think we need to unlearn race. Nobody is born a racist. We sort of pick this up from our community. I think we need to teach our kids what we have in common, our shared roots. Sure, celebrate what's different about us. Teach us about our differences. But I think we really need to teach tolerance and respect. What has race really done for us except turn us against each other, divide us, make us think of ourselves as different people that could be ranked? I think we need to teach our children to abandon this old system of slave racial categories where one is better than the next. We need to teach our kids this. We need to teach our students this. Tolerance and respect for human differences. We need to celebrate what's different about us. Differences are cool. We need to see each other as individuals instead of as a type of person. How about getting to know somebody? How about calling someone by their name? How about seeing somebody? Seeing somebody for who they are. See, race matters because we live in a world where it feels real. It feels real if you're trying to join a fraternity in the South and you're black. You're treated differently. It feels real if you're at the airport and you're brown and you're trying to get through your day because you're treated differently. Race feels real in America if you're driving while black and you got a broken taillight. You're treated differently. It's not biological, though, guys. It's not the shape of your nose, the color of your skin. There's no biological trait that we can use to separate us, to divide us. But it feels real because it's part of our culture. Race is a cultural construction. It's not a biological reality. It's part of our culture, though. And I suggest maybe it's time to change our culture. I have a homework assignment for you guys today. Your homework is to change the world. And I stand here among a group of exceptional educators, exceptional people. I think we can do it. Thanks. Thank you. Amazing.
We also would like to present Mark with a plaque commemorating his wonderful address. Mark. And Mark said he doesn't do flowers, so he told me what he does do.
Perfect. Thank you, Ed.
So I'm sure this provocative lecture has got you thinking about questions you could ask Mark. If you would just proceed to CA 211, we can continue the conversation. Thank you very much.